you. Okay, we have no delegations and inquiries, no unfinished business, and we have 3 items of correspondence. Is there any business arising from these items? Director Paul.
Chair, would it be in order for me, I don't have a motion, but a couple comments and update on the Lesquity Island residents?
Sure. That's item
concerns that were raised. 6.3.
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, I just want to say so those letters were sent, the dates on them are November 10th and 11th. One of them had a video that maybe some of you saw, and it showed actually pretty bad conditions of road, given that was the very start of the road network. That was right near where the pavement ends, near the ferry. It's about 100 meters of pavement. And so the roads were really bad. The problem was that the company, for whatever reason, the maintenance contractor didn't have any equipment on the island for months. So for I don't know how long. So there was no grading, no graveling, no nothing. Very shortly afterwards, late November, there was a grader or some equipment came over, and so the roads are actually in very good condition. So there's no need. I won't put forward any letter writing or action. I want to thank the residents for writing. That was the appropriate thing to do. Residents also wrote to the ministry. I notified them that would be maybe a better place to write, but they wrote to the ministry as well. And if this comes back again in a chronic way, then I would expect we may get more letters again. But at the time, we don't need to do anything. The roads are in good condition. There doesn't seem any purpose to take any action. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Director Paul. I've got a lot of sympathy for road problems. We sure have them on Texada as well. We're now on to reports, number 8. And I understand 8.1 is the Qathat Regional Coastal Flood Adaptation Strategy report and the project completion. Ms. Rodden, I understand you have a presentation to share with us.
Thank you, Chair. I have just a couple of comments, brief introductory comments to make. So the report on today's agenda marks completion of the Qathat Regional Coastal Flood Adaptation Strategy. And Tamsin Lyle of Epwater Consulting is here to provide you with a presentation on the strategy. And before Tamsin gets started, I just want to acknowledge the contributions of staff from the 3 partnering governments and that participated in the project working group over the last year. And these staff include Carmen Gallegos and Denise Smith from the Tla'amin Nation, and Daniela Ferguson and Rod Fraser from the City of Powell River, and Melissa Howie and Charisse Roberts from Qathat Regional District. And I will pass it to Tamsin to make the presentation. Thank you.
Tamsin, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Laura. I'm just logistics first. I can share my screen. Let's try. Yes. Can you all see my screen? Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So back to the fun stuff. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to your meeting today. My name is Tamsin Lyle. I'm the principal engineer of Epwater Consulting. We're a firm here in Vancouver in the beautiful unceded territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. And I'm excited to present to you very briefly the sum total of about a year's worth of work that included many of you. And I appreciate that some of you probably have seen some of this information already because you actively participated in our stakeholder and other workshops. So I really appreciate that. Let's click on over here. So I'm thinking this is probably quite prescient as it's getting dark outside, and we've seen a few storms, and we're likely to see a few more in the coming months. So we know that coastal flood hazards are an issue in the region as well as across all of British Columbia and around the world, and that this is something we're really noticing these days, in that we're seeing the direct impacts of these events on our communities. And we are, at least anecdotally, feeling like these are becoming more frequent and more intense. And we do have some science behind that as well, including some information that didn't make it into this report because it's super fresh and new around the connection between climate change and big global processes that create things like atmospheric rivers and other coastal events or other storm events that create coastal hazards. So this is something that's sort of definitely, hopefully, forefront in our minds, because if we know about it and acknowledge it, then we have an opportunity to reduce our risk going forward. So just wanted to highlight that the regional district, as well as your municipal partners, have been aware of this obviously for a long time and have been working on this project and related pieces to it for a few years now. And you completed in 2022, 2021, the sort of foundational piece of information and reporting to support this work, which is flood hazard mapping. So that's figuring out where the water will go and how deep it will be, as well as some high-level risk mapping, and I'll explain my terminology in a bit, which in early this year enabled you to go forward and start developing an adaptation strategy for coastal hazards, because now we have a good understanding of those hazards, how often they're going to occur, where they're going to occur, and what that means for the community. And that is this project. So I'll give you a quick overview of this. Our overall project goal, defined by yourselves and the communities, the partner communities, was to engage with partners like the regional district, City of Powell River, and Tla'amin Nation, and the public, to develop a strategy that explores coastal flood adaptation options and charts a path of next steps. So very high level goal there of basically embracing that this is happening, understanding it more, and then providing some tangible next steps for each of the municipalities and governments to adapt to coastal flood hazards. So we did this by really diving in and embracing the complexity of this problem. So this type of problem we would call a wicked problem, because it really does have no solution, and it's systemic. It has a lot of sort of complexities and characters and challenges. And so to really embrace this project, we took the approach of using and diving down different specific tasks to tackle this wicked problem. So that included understanding the policy context. So what is the province doing right now? What is the federal government doing? Who are all the jurisdictions that are involved in this? What are each of, what is the Qathet regional district, as well as the other member communities, what are they doing in the policy realm to understand what the baseline is, also what the best practice is out there. We also dove in a bit more on this risk and science side of things to understand really what's at risk, what are the concerns, what are the values that might be damaged by coastal floods, as well as providing and working to develop some decision support tools to enable each of the member municipalities to move forward on this project. And throughout this, we engaged at all different types of levels. So some of you were involved in that, so you know about it. But we had an advisory group that included some of the staff membership that Laura highlighted at the outset, as well as a slightly broader group. We also had a stakeholder group that included some of you. And we also engaged with the public in person, which is very exciting for the first time in a while, as well as through online tools and surveys. And all of this was cobbled together or mushed together, woven together, I should say, to develop a strategy, which has now been presented to you in two formats. One is the sort of big, long technical report that I wouldn't encourage you to read, but there is a much shorter overview report that is targeted to folks like yourselves who have many other things to think about and need something nice and short that sort of drives home the importance of doing this work and the rationale for this work, as well as what you can be doing as a region. So I just wanted to highlight all the multis of this project. And by that, I mean the many challenges we faced. So one of the things that we were grappling with was the multi-hazard nature of this project. So we weren't just looking at flooding, which means, getting wet and then getting dry afterwards, but we were also looking at things like coastal erosion, which has a much more catastrophic impact in terms of the character of the hazard if you're losing land. We were also looking at this multi-jurisdictional concept of 3 different jurisdictions that are then working underneath the province and the federal government and other jurisdictions. And these are all very moving targets at the moment when it comes to emergency management and disaster risk reduction. And then thirdly, we had a multidisciplinary project in that we included voices on the consultant side of the project, as well as on the client side of the project, who were planners, but also engineers and scientists and facilitation and engagement specialists. So really kind of embracing the all of the multis as part of this project. As you all know, because you live there, one of the other things that we faced was the fact that the region is very large and has a really long and beautiful and stunning and varied coastline. And to try and tackle the enormity, like actual sort of geographic enormity of the problem, we approached it from a couple of different angles, one being that high level, yes, the whole region approach, but we also chose to dive in deep into what we call the archetypal areas. So we worked with the community to identify some of the areas that were most at risk and tried to sort of tease out why they were, and then created these archetypes that we used as part of our engagement strategy, which I will tell you about in a bit. And those archetypes are really driven by the conversation on risk. And so here's a bit of terminology. Those of you who participated in our workshops will have this ingrained deeply, hopefully, in your minds. But the approach we were taking was consideration, not that the hazard is the thing that we have to manage or control, so the water or the erosion, but that it's the fact that interacts with things that we care about. So our communities, our critical infrastructure, our cultural artifacts. And so risk as the sort of the center of this triangle is what we need to manage for. And so with that premise in mind, it opens up a lot of doors in terms of what we can do to manage for this. And it's really in keeping with all of the other decisions you're probably making as a regional board, which are predominantly risk-based when it comes down to it. So as an example of one of these archetypal areas that we use that was based on first determining these are the areas that are most at risk, here's an example of what we call the docks. So obviously you're local, you'll right away recognize that this was based on Lund, but we took the information that we knew about the hazards in the area in terms of the flood, how often it'll be there, how deep it will be, how that will change over time with climate change, as well as a quantitative understanding of what's in Lund or in other places in terms of the structures that are there, the number of people that are there, the information we had on social vulnerability of those populations, and all of that was tied together with some of the conversations we had with the community to develop a sort of an archetype of why is this area important and why should we manage for risk in this area. And something like Lund sort of speaks to the sort of commercial values and it being a bit of a center for the region, as well as that transportation hub. Obviously, it's where the ferries go off to the smaller islands from. So it's a really important regional hub. So we actually have 4 of these archetypes if you want to dive into the technical report, but at the high level, you probably just need to know about one of them. And then we took all of this information, all those technical studies, as well as these archetypes, and we went out to the community to have conversations. So you can see how much of that was done. We had some successes, absolutely, in terms of gathering information. Our survey was particularly successful. We did have some events that didn't go ahead, I think because of the timing and everybody being zoomed out and those kind of things. But we had some really, really rich information that we were able to gather from the community. And so what did we hear as part of this? Well, we really heard a lot about, how valued people, or the values that people have from living in the region, and how connected they are to the region, to their communities, to the environment, but also some of the tensions and the differences in different groups of people. So we've got a few examples up here, but if we divided up people who lived on the waterfront versus those who lived further away, they had different values about how we should be protecting or mitigating risks along the coast. And so that was one of the sort of highlights and challenges of the trade-offs that we were facing as we moved forward. We also presented to the public and stakeholders and others some of the positive side of things. So it's not all negative, and here are our risks and here are the challenges we face, but we also provided information and resources on what we can be doing as a community, as an individual, to mitigate risk from erosion and flood hazards into the future. And we provided a sort of all risk-based, sort of all framed around that triangle of the things that we can do to stop the hazard or exposure or vulnerability, as well as increase community resilience. And so these are all, presented to the community, as well as in these reports that you have available to you now. But of course, with all of this information in terms of the information that we were gleaning from the community, as well as the desktop information, so where those risks are, how complicated this is, how the community sees these challenges in very, very different ways. We took all of that information to try and develop some tools to support on decisions, recognizing that there are like very big tensions and trade-offs on some of these decisions. And we had a series of activities and stakeholder workshops to really sort of tease some of these out, to understand the tension, especially between things like collective action, so especially sort of government regulated collective action versus individual actions, regulations versus non-regulations in the different contexts. So it was quite the sort of adventure to provide, or to sort of tease out the themes and understand some of the biggest tensions that we were seeing based on our research and the community feedback. So we're almost there. So what we did at the end of this was take all of that information and gather it up to try and create sort of a document to move you forward and achieve our goal at the outset about creating some tangible next steps for the region to move forward on coastal adaptation. And to do this, we took an approach of developing some guiding principles. So these were based on all of that feedback that we gathered, as well as international best practice. And we sort of themed all that information into some guiding principles that are specific to your region. And some of them, I think some of them are unique to this project, and I haven't seen in other projects that we've done. We often, for example, see principle number 1, take a coordinated and consistent approach. That is a very usual thing to be doing. But this principle around acting in the best interest of future generations was something I think that was sort of unique to this area, and I think sort of speaks to the way that people feel invested in living in the region. We have the principle 3 of collectively growing our ability to be flexible and adaptive. And so I think that came out of the understanding that some of the hard solutions that are currently in place have challenges associated with them, and also just recognizing that there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of our future climate. This idea around defending what cannot be replaced is sort of a risk-based idea. So recognizing that some things are too valuable to lose, and that we should be putting our resources and our effort into saving these. There's another risk-based concept of prioritizing funding to protect things that benefit the most people. So sort of a very community-driven thing, or create the greatest good, but on the other flip side of that, but also enable and incentivize individuals to act on climate adaptation. And then recognizing that we have a little bit of time, especially in this region where the projections for sea level rise are relatively low in the global context, and even in the British Columbia context. There's time to be doing some of these things, and some of the more dramatic or drastic options like retreat, for example, don't have to happen tomorrow. They can happen over decades. And so that really creates a lot of opportunity in terms of actually implementing these ideas. So these were our guiding principles. But in addition to the guiding principles, we did provide actual resources related to the implementation of these. So we have created scads of information and sort of tangible actions. Some of these are in the overview report are really targeted at the region. So they take that sort of that broader approach, and then the technical report dive down into the individual jurisdictions. So for example, providing sort of context on this is the current sort of jurisdictional context or the bylaws and zoning that you currently have in place, and here's what you can do. So at the regional level, there are some very specific recommendations related to how you might want to consider working together as 3 different local governments in future. We also provided some guidance around land use and buildings, and specifically, this is really about thinking about individual building controls that you might have in place in 3 jurisdictions, and how you can work together to make those more consistent, and then also make ensure that in the future the risk in the region is being reduced. Similarly, some information around infrastructure and that shared infrastructure that you have along the coast, recognizing that the highway is what really sort of connects the whole region, or not the whole region, the mainland portion of the region. And that if you lose that, that has ramifications for everybody, but also recognizing that the ferry terminal, for example, as well as your telephone and all the other infrastructure is really important. We also provided information on how to engage in the future with the public, starting from the base that we've already created through this project, as well as some sort of more sciencey things around paying attention to what's going on in terms of the science to make sure that you're staying ahead of potential changes to any projections. And then we also provided some sort of more specific commentary and thoughts on how in the region you can continue to reduce risk and build resilience. The first one being, try not to make it worse. And I think I don't know if any of you follow the news closely, especially out of Ontario. Ontario's doing a fantastic job right now with making things worse with a change in legislation that is allowing for a lot of development in green areas that is affecting erosion and increasing exposure and risk. So I would encourage you not to follow that example. But I mean, I think not having the regulatory tools in place and the policies in place to ensure that you're not making things worse and that you've created a structure so that future generations won't accidentally make things worse. Also, some recommendations around really mimicking natural systems, recognizing that our natural environment is in fact the best buffer for these types of events. And it's a really great tool that we should be embracing. And then also related to that, management over time, recognizing that there's things that we can do as individuals and as governments in the very short term to be better prepared for these events. And then with temporary measures and emergency response measures, and then working over time, like I said, you have a lot of time to move forward to reduce your vulnerability over time. And then recognizing as well that in some cases, retreat is going to be a choice that will need to be enacted, and that there's some very big trade-offs and challenges there, but also a lot of time to make that happen. And we provided some ideas around tools, around some regulatory tools and incentives to try and create the opportunity for that. I'm actually going to skip over this, but we also provided in the technical report quite a lot of more detailed information for those specific archetypal areas. So if you're in somewhere like Lund, here's the list of things that you might want to consider. If you're in a residential area, here's a list of things you might consider. We also had an archetype related to, which was modeled on Savory Island because of the erosion challenges on the South Bluff. And so again, here is the sort of menu of things that you should be considering in those areas. And we also, like I said earlier, provided information in the technical report that's very specific to each of the local governments involved in the project. So that really is sort of where we ended our work. And I think we just want to encourage you with this sort of closing next step that you have this amazing body of work now, I think, that was really supported through stakeholder engagement and public engagement. So it's sort of, it feels very grounded in place, that I think has now created the opportunity for you to work collaboratively together as three governments and increase your regional resilience for a long-term risk reduction. And that is it for me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tamsin, for a really comprehensive, thorough report. There's a lot of material in here. I'm opening up to questions from committee members. Okay. Oh, Director Gisborne, Director Fall.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I have a question about the consistency across the region, especially in relation to land use planning. I've read through the report, and thank you for all the wonderful work that's done. I see there's also reference to the Let's Talk Land Use Survey that was adopted or accepted by this board earlier this year. So when you're talking about consistency across the region, I presume you're also referring to land use regulations. So is the kind of intent for consistency in relation to land use, are you referring to having like similar land use restrictions and regulations across the region, rather than, you know, the model that we currently have, which is where most of our electoral areas are very light or hands-off in terms of the regulation approach? Is that the sense that I'm getting from this strategy?
Yeah, so Director Gisborne, at a very high level, yes, I think we were pushing for the idea that overall there should be some consistency in the longer term, but recognizing that there are some very distinct areas and also jurisdictions, and that there's reasons for that distinctivity. I don't know what the word is there. I feel like I've lost my vocabulary. So definitely trying to push for more consistency, because that creates a lot more sort of simplicity for individuals, because many people, I think, don't realize that there's, you know, they're in different places and there's different rules, and that, you know, working towards the same ultimate goal of reducing risk is very helpful, but also noting that there are a lot of challenges associated with that, because everyone's distinct and every region is distinct. I don't know, Laura, if you wanted to add anything. We spent a lot of time crafting this language with the help of Laura.
I don't have anything to add to that. No.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Director Paul.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms. Lau, for the very good presentation. And the report is excellent. It's tons of information. One of the items that stood out to me is public education, or one of the recommendations, I should say, because that seems to be really powerful, especially for the more individual action-oriented side of the ledger as opposed to the collective. And I you know, and there's suggestion for guidebooks and things like that. And I just want to ask maybe if you had any thoughts on the balance between, you know, information that's more general that we might be able to develop or access or develop in partnership with other local governments around the area, compared to really, you know, spending the time and cost of us developing specific information for the Cathet region. And what the, you know, is there, in terms of, you know, what might be the best bang for the buck in terms of getting information to people that they can use, and of course more details better, but we'll have to pay for it. More general might be more available because there's guidebooks available. So thoughts on how we develop, you know, we can put it on our webpage and so on, but on how we get that information and improve on it.
That's a really good question, Director Fall. I mean, I think recognizing that you are a small local government with limited resources, I think my gut would be to say partner and leverage and use information and work together with others to develop guidebooks that are relevant for the sort of maybe the whole Georgia Strait, for example. So there's a lot of work underway on the other side of the strait currently. And I know, for example, Green Shores is just about to produce a new book related to waterfront development. So there's a lot of other resources that I think you can promote and maybe save yourself the dollars of creating those very specific ones, except when it comes to providing information to individuals on their sort of regulatory requirements within each of these jurisdictions, so that people understand that there's a need to get certain permits or to talk to Moti or Tla'amin Nation about the potential impacts of choices that they're making on the coast. So there's a bit of a mix there, but I think that those types of things are relatively low cost in terms of development, and that some of these bigger ideas like Green Shores, for example, maybe you can share that burden with some of your neighbors across the water.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Director Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. So I spent a ton of time reading this report today.
I'm sorry.
No, I was interested. One of the questions I have is, I noticed that there are, in some maps, the dots for homes or whatever they are, and they're in the higher risk areas. And I'm wondering if those neighborhoods have had access to this information, or is that part of what we would incorporate into our education in the future, or have folks in those areas had any contribution to the study?
So 3 things come to mind right away. So just so you know, those dots aren't people's houses. They're the centroids of the parcels. So there's a bit of, and that's because we didn't have individual houses or building footprints. So that's one of the challenges. So as a result of that challenge, we were quite careful in what has been presented publicly to date in terms of presenting those dots and individual pieces of information, because of the concern that it would be worrying to these folks. We did have that wider engagement that went out to potentially everybody in the region to engage, and I'd have to dive into the engagement report to understand where people were participating from in our various events, but they will have seen some level of this information. But the final thing I would like to note is that so we're just about to publish a paper on disclosure of this type of information to the public, and the perceived concerns about that from local governments and others related to panic and real estate values and all of the things that are really worrying. But the literature around the world and across Canada suggests that that's actually very, very marginal and is much smaller than the benefit that is gained from providing this information to support people to make decisions. So did I answer all the questions? I feel like I might have missed one.
Well, you made me have another question. When you were talking about
Follow up.
It is kind of, when we're talking about risks of disclosing information versus risks of not disclosing information, if governments are permitting assets to be constructed and people are spending money on them within a zone, when we are aware of information, has that resulted in legal liability of municipalities or whoever is permitting when they were where they had information that the proponents maybe didn't?
That is a very sticky question, but I'm not a lawyer. But I would encourage you to go look at the City of Edmonton's recent court case in this area. Yes, not disclosing has become a legal liability to them. So they had information that they didn't share with the public. So that's one piece of information I can suggest. And then the other, there are some recent examples of communities around British Columbia that have gone through similar processes, developed flood maps and risk, and then have made the choice to disclose and then provide some sort of interim guidance and policy for individuals because of this concern.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Director Doak.
Yeah, I want to say thank you for the report. It's a good one. I will admit I didn't read every page today. I felt you should, though, in amongst other things. But I think, you know, number one in your list of things to do there is to have a coordinated, a regional approach. And I think, well, it doesn't take very many words to say that at the top. I think that would actually be the biggest challenge for the area, because the city has, you know, well-developed development permit requirements and building and zoning laws that are quite detailed. There's a regional district, and I'm not arguing about it today, but the electoral areas have a very unrestricted freedom of do what you want and a regulation strategy, and to coordinate those together is difficult. And not coordinating and not having a regional approach has its own risk. It has the risk of making things worse, because people naturally will migrate away from where it's difficult to do things and go to where it's easy. If they could build a house on the beach where there is no regulation about how far back from the beach a house needs to be, that's where people will do it. And that'll end up concentrating the risk in the places probably where it shouldn't be. But, you know, there's a bunch of big things to get over there. I think the report's great. I am actually going to go home over the weekend and read all of it, because I think it's very valuable. And there's some challenges ahead of us there, but I think that, you know, if we take our time and look at it, we can get through it. And I think this is the one report you're making to the group here. I know that others were invited, like all of City Council and the current Tla'amin legislatures were invited. We've got actually 4 people here, including Councillor Elliott and myself from City Council. But I'm just going to say publicly that I wish there were more people here, because I think this is really important to our future. And I think it has to be thought about by all local governments.
Thank you, Director Dove. Are there any further questions of our delegation? Seeing no hands up, Benson, I want to thank you very much for your presentation. Very informative, a ton to digest. I also have some concerns about consistency, because there are very different attitudes in the different electoral areas. But it also occurs to me that the concept of working together is one of your primary, you know, principles. And I think by working together, we can overcome some of the differences by just simply respecting that each area will have its differences, and that's okay. But we can work together to try to mitigate what we need to do. So thank you. Thank you very much. Directors, you have a motion in front of you. It is a 3-part motion with ands in between, so it is one motion. Director Paul?
I'll move the recommendation, but I believe that the second and third clauses need to include the words "the committee recommend" in there. So I'll move it, assuming that.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. Okay. That the committee recommends in each of the paragraphs.
Well, currently they're all together, so it's okay to have them like that, but we could do it that way.
Because there are ands between the paragraphs, so it is it's one motion. Okay, so it has been moved, seconded by, is there a seconder? Director Brander, thank you. Discussion on the motion. Director Gisborne.
Thank you, Chair. I would like the third part of the motion to be split from the first 2 parts.
All right. Is there any objection to splitting those off? I'm seeing no objection. Corporate officer?
Chair, I just want to make sure that it can be, yeah.
Okay. So on that advice, we are considering the first 2 paragraphs. Is there any further discussion on those 2 paragraphs on this motion? All right, seeing no hand, all in favor? Any opposed? Carried unanimously. All right, now the 3rd paragraph. It already has been moved and seconded. Discussion, Director Dove.
To start with, I think we need to add the words "the committee recommends" at the beginning. It's now not one continuous paragraph.
Thank you through the chair. Robert's rules does allow edits like that when we divide the question, so that will be done.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the motion? Director Gisborne.
Thank you, Chair. I think moving forward with the recommendations in this study has significant land use planning implications. The reason I wanted the third portion of this of this motion separated is to guide and inform future land use planning. I really think and I believe that this strategy should be put before the Planning Committee for fulsome discussion relative to the implications for the rural residents of the Planning Service. It's been brought up that we are very inconsistent between the municipality, Tla'amin Nation, and our electoral areas. We conducted extensive public consultation in the previous term to explore the public's desire for development permits in natural hazard areas. The residents of Area B and C gave a clear mandate. Their answer was no. So we amended, I remember at least, the Area B OCP to include natural hazard maps and did not pursue the development permit option. Shortly thereafter, we spent, I think it was around $50,000 to conduct extensive public consultation for a temperature check on increased land use regulations in the area. The significant majority of areas A, B, and C gave a resounding no, and we accepted that report this year. So it seems like if we accept this motion as it is, we're giving the signal that we're just going to keep pushing until we get a yes. I don't think that's entirely respectful of the public, and I think that we should actually forward this motion to the Land Use Planning Committee, or strike the informed future land use planning from the motion, so that this motion only is related to asset management, emergency preparedness, and community engagement, because having something that has such a major impact on land use planning, I think, can be a bit of a challenge for making sure we have that public trust going forward, because there is this we've heard very, very clearly from the public out here about their views on increased land use regulations, and I would like to hear what the rest of the committee thinks about those items. Thank you, Chair.
Director Gisborne, are you proposing an amendment then to take out the words land use planning from this motion?
Yes, I'll put forward the amendment to remove the words land use planning.
All right. Is there a seconder for that?
No,
Director Joe? Are you seconding it?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Is there a seconder for that motion?
I'll second, just so we can move on to the conversation.
Okay. So now on the amendment, Director Elliott.
First of all, thank you for raising that concern about the public and the engagement that has happened in the past. I'm not in favor of the amendment, even though I second it, because it does not say there will be future land use planning, just that if there is, that this should be an integral part of that information that informs future land use planning. So I know that's it's not splitting hairs either, because if there should be land use planning anywhere within the region, this is a very important aspect of information that needs to be included. And so I'm not in favor of hiving it off of the motion. And I don't believe it is disrespectful to the public, because I think the public in your area were very interested in all of the information so that they could self-manage their risks. And your land use planning may take the form of information rather than dictation or regulation, rather. So there are many forms of land use planning, and this is an important part of it. So I'd like to leave it the way it is.
Thank you. Director Doak, did you have your hand up?
I did. I'm speaking in opposition to the amendment, because I don't think it's a positive thing to do. I think we've spent money on this study. We need to do something with it. The resolution simply says that we should use the study that the taxpayers have paid for to inform future land use planning, asset management, emergency preparedness, etc. It doesn't make any decisions on how to use it or what might come out of that information. It simply requires that we use it to inform people when we're making decisions going forward in the future. And whenever we make decisions, we'll have the appropriate public consultation to do that. So I'm not in favor of the amendment. I'm in favor of the motion as it was originally stated.
Thank you, Director Doak. Seeing no further hands, I just want to throw in a comment.
Chair.
That,
Hello, Chair.
Director.
Can you hear me?
Director Lennox, there you are.
Director Lennox, I believe.
Thank you. Sorry. I'm just trying to add to the comments here, and I really do appreciate Director Gisborne bringing this and explaining some of the elements of it. I do agree that it is a planning issue, and but I also think that the motion as it's worded allows us to maintain the concepts that have been brought up by the other directors, that it is part of information, and through the campaign and hearing from my constituents, their direction is clearly very, very little regulation, but on the opposite side of the coin, they want information so that when these issues do arise, they have the full package. So I appreciate the sentiment, as long as the motion, the intent is just for information and future consideration. I'm okay with it. Thanks.
Okay, we lost you, Director Lennox. Are you still there?
Yeah,
right.
Thank you. I'm not sure how much you heard, but I'm done. Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you. I think we got the gist of what you had to say. So I'm going to throw in a comment because I haven't yet spoken on this issue, and that is to say in Area D, fluvial hazards were presented as a report at the, near the end of the OCP review process. And it was agreed that those documents and that information would help to inform without writing in any formal regulation related to that information. So I think because the language is to guide and inform, it's very pertinent to leave it in. It doesn't mean that it's going to be prescriptive about, you can't do this and you can't do that, but rather simply as part of the information package that the public would have access to. So I have no problem with the motion the way it is. Okay, Director Gisborne, this is your second time to speak on this.
Oh, I thought it was my first, since I made the amendment. Thank you, Chair. The motion is to guide and inform future land use planning. I have no problem with this document informing future land use planning. I'm even, not even really opposed to having this document guide future land use planning in some way. However, the land use planning is handled by the planning committee, and the reason I put forward this motion is to remove the land use planning aspect of this motion from the motion, and therefore we can take the land use planning aspect of the Regional Coastal Flood Adaptation Strategy technical report and have it sent to the planning committee where it can be discussed by the appropriate committee. If this amendment passes, it doesn't mean that this document will not have any impact on the planning service or the planning committee. Actually, quite the opposite. If anything, if this amendment passes, then I would bring this item before the planning committee if no one else does, because I do believe that this is an important document. I believe it has an impact on asset management, emergency preparedness, community engagement of all sorts, as well as land use planning. But land use planning is handled by the planning committee. And right now we're going down the path of talking about land use planning in the electoral areas, but this isn't the planning committee. This is the committee of the whole. And later on in our agenda, I think there's a proposal about, terms of reference and making sure things are handled at the appropriate committees. And I just believe that if we're going to be discussing technical reports that have land use planning impacts, then they need to be handled at the land use planning committee, because that is the appropriate committee to handle such an item. I'm not saying that we just, okay, we use this strategy with the exception of land use planning. No, we should use this definitely to inform our land use planning decisions. I'm just saying that the discussion for the impact on land use planning in the electoral areas needs to happen at the planning committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Director Gisborne. Now we're discussing the amendment. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing no hands, we are voting on the amendment only. All in favor? Any opposed? The amendment is not carried. So back to the main motion. Is there, Director Paul?
Just one question, and I am, and I understand the concerns raised by Director Gisborne, but I'm actually in favor of it being as broad as possible, and I think it is to inform and guide. So in the context of those processes, those services, it doesn't, the way it's worded, it does not require anything. It doesn't change how we do things. It just says use this information in the context of that. So my question through the chair is really, is a list of elements here: services, land use planning, asset management, emergency preparedness, and so on. But I'm thinking about, regional parks. I'm thinking about some other, elements, but especially regional parks, places like Shelter Point, which may need to take this into account for any future operation. So I just want to confirm that the way this is worded would be applied and used to inform and guide as broadly as possible for basically everything we do on the shoreline. Is that correct?
CAO?
Chair, I'd like to refer this question to Manager of Planning Services.
Rod.
Thank you, Chair. Through the chair, a simple change that might appease everybody's interests is just to remove the word planning, so that the report would guide and inform future land use, asset management, emergency preparedness, and community engagement. Because land use would be broader, like Director Fall is suggesting.
I'll move that amendment. I think that's an excellent idea.
Okay,
I'll second.
Okay, Director, you just want to second it. All right, on the amendment to remove the word planning from this motion, is there discussion on this proposed amendment? Seeing no hands. All in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
Any opposed? Unopposed. Okay. The amendment is carried. So now we are voting on the main motion as amended, without the word planning in that paragraph. Is there any further discussion on the main motion? Seeing no hands, we will have our vote. All in favor? Any opposed? The motion is carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tamsin. So now we are on to item 8.2, the board standing committee and meeting schedule. Director Brander.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to move that the committee recommend the board approve the 2023 board and standing committee meeting schedule option 2 as presented, and that the board endorse the 2023 holiday season office closure from 4:30 p.m. on Friday, December 22nd, 2023 to 8:30 a.m. on Tuesday, January 2nd, 2024.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Director Elliott, thank you. Director Brander.
Thanks, Chair. This is obviously and it's an important issue for all of us, but I looked at the 3 options that were presented to us, and option 2 just seems like a real obvious one for me, for many reasons. There's minimal conflicts with municipal meetings, allows more attendance, and with fewer hassles and costs for Director Fall because of the scheduling. If we go by the usual meeting lengths that have been provided to us in the report, it should allow for breaks in between the meetings. And I imagine agendas can probably be massaged a little bit as well. If the staff sees a particularly long finance committee meeting coming up, maybe they can make a shorter committee of the whole. That's possible. This option allows fewer days per month for those directors who are working, easier for staff, easier for delegations, many of whom represent organizations, so they can come down and present to us during regular working hours. And we might get a possible increase in attendance because a lot of the people in our community are older. They don't like to travel in the evening. They can show up during the day. So I see there's a lot of potential positives to changing to this schedule. And there's nothing to say that we can't change it again later on down the road if it doesn't work out well.
I'm not seeing any further hands, so I'm going to inject a comment and then we'll get to you, Director Elliott. I have a lot of concerns about option 2, preferring option 3 for one. With option 2, committee of the whole is scheduled at 4 o'clock. So there's no advantage to, late night travel. It doesn't eliminate late night travel for those of us who have to take ferries and drive home at, ridiculous hours of the night. So I also find that having 3 meetings on one day is quite onerous. It's better to break them up, at least have 2 on one day and a third on a separate day, just to give us that 1 day's break so that we can fully absorb the often very detailed material that is put in front of us. So those are my thoughts. I'll be interested in hearing yours, Director Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. I'm game to try it. I think we would need to have more amenities in a meeting where on a day when you're having that many meeting hours in one location, such as like coffee or something. We can't just have water if we're going to be there from 10:30 in the morning to 6 o'clock at night with just some breaks in the middle. So that was kind of one of my comments is if you're going to load up a day like that, you need to have better services available in the room for people. Which is a small budget item, but and I think it's possible that people could be getting a little bit tired and maybe not making the best decisions by the end of that day. But I'm game to try because it does pack travel into one day. But one overnight might be okay too. So I live in town. I'm good either way.
Thank you, Director Dowd, and then Director Gisborne.
Well, I went through these in as much detail as I could without going crazy. And option 2 has the least conflicts for me. And frankly, in the last year and a half, or year anyway, I've had many days that have had 5 meetings on the same day with the City Finance Committee, a regional hospital district meeting, a committee of the whole meeting, or regional district meeting, and a closed meeting after that. So that's a lot to do in one day, but with this schedule in option 2, we would end up with more days to prepare. Hopefully we could maybe extend the time we get our notice of our agenda so we don't have to do all that preparing in 2 days, because that is more of a concern to me. Preparing for a meeting within 2 days when you have hundreds of pages of documents is challenging enough. If we're preparing for 3 meetings or 4 meetings in the same day with similar length agendas, that's going to become an issue. I'm sure of it. And if we had more lead time, that would make it easier. The other options, option number 1, I just my piece of paper got almost worn out looking at all the conflicts with City Council and City Finance agreements. The option 2 works best, has no conflicts that I can see. And I'm with Councillor Elliott, is that I'm going to be taking lunch breaks and coffee breaks.
Thank you, Director Dowd. Director Gisborne.
I think Director Fall had his hand up before I did. So I'll pass the floor to him if he was looking to speak.
I was. Okay, thank you. I first want to say I really appreciate the work put into this by our staff, and I think it was very considerate and especially for the Area E Director situation, because of course my travel restrictions and water taxis and ferries and overnights and so on make things difficult. And so I don't want everything to be wrapped around what's best for me. But option 2 does work very well. Option 3 would work too, but both of those are good, and option 2 would be the most efficient for me. There is a risk of it, kind of being a bit of a slog. On the other hand, I really appreciated seeing the lengths of time, the average lengths of time, because it's the finance committee transition to committee of the whole that seems to be the biggest risk. And we have had some long finance committee meetings. The last, second one ago was 4 hours long. So maybe that's very occasional. So having, 100 minutes is the average. If we, I guess would just try to run a tighter ship and keep an eye out for longer meetings. And if they're at 2 hours, then that gives us an hour in between. So that can work for me. And, I understand this schedules can change. I mean, we can try it for a while, as Director Elliott said, and review it. I mean, we can see if we're, losing hair and sleep over this and going crazy. We can review this and say this isn't working. So I'm game to try it. I think it's worth the effort. The other thing I want to point out is, and I can't quite find it in the agenda, but somewhere in there, the staff report did say that staff would put in efforts to try to get information out earlier. And I think that I really appreciate. And I think even having draft agendas that would come out on the Friday before or something like that, even if we know that there might be additional items or revisions, then we can start diving in. Reports don't change that much. So if we have a big report like the one we just saw, we can start diving into that and preparing at least something. So I'm okay to try it. Thank you.
Director Gisborne.
Thank you, Chair. I took a look at the 4 options. Option 2 gave me quite a bit of concern, and it has to do with something Elimina said. He said, your committees should not be making decisions by exhaustion. And I'm not sure about the other members of the board, but I try my best to, read all the material. And when I read all the material, even if it's 1 day or 2 days or even 5 days before the meeting, it keeps rattling around in my head. So, the planning committee, the finance committee, then the committee of the whole, and I try and stay focused on the information that is coming up in the upcoming meeting. And to have all 3 meetings on the same day, I can just see, my brain pouring out of my ears the night before as I lay there and try and sleep and try and go, okay, well, there's this item and that item and all these items. And I can find that by the time I get to those meetings, I might be all over the place, because there's so much that goes on in all 3 of our meetings of planning and finance and committee of the whole. So that's my first concern is cramming all these meetings together on 1 day. So this would essentially make our board have 2 days of meetings, one on a Wednesday, and then the second one would be our board meeting, which would be on the Wednesday later on. Sorry, I had to cough. The other thing is, personally, when I stated my preferences, I said anytime before 10 can be quite problematic because I work the night shift looking after my father, but I prefer 12 until 9. I can do early in the morning, but that usually means I'm having to put a pause on some of my other responsibilities. So having us start at 10:30, and then at 1 o'clock we have finance, and then 4 p.m. It's committee of the whole, it makes quite a packed day. And I'm not sure if that's going to result in the best decision making and working relationship for all of us. The other point I want to bring up is when we consider our meetings, we have multiple factors and multiple individuals to consider. Our current board members, our staff, the staff of other organizations, the general public, and future prospective members of our board. And this makes me think of something I heard many, many years ago about when working age individuals wanted to get involved with our regional district. Having our meetings in the middle of the working day cuts into the ability for working age individuals to show up and attend our meetings, either in person or to come as delegations. Planning is a big issue, especially in rural areas. And a lot of the working age people in our electoral areas, well, they'll be working at that time, 10:30 in the morning. And I really think that having that time, that start time, can impact their ability to attend. I think we could have a bit of a compromise. We could have our committee meetings start at 12 noon because a lot of people have lunch breaks, so they could come, as a delegation and present during that lunch break of 12 o'clock. Otherwise, having our meetings in the evening does allow a lot of individuals to come to these meetings. Myself, before I ran for office, I was attending these meetings as a member of the public, but I was attending it at the end of my workday. I would come and I would sit in the audience, and that helped me understand, the dynamics in the regional district, and then that helped me consider that, hey, I can run for office as a working age fellow. So I actually don't support option 2. I see too many challenges with cramming all the meetings into one day and having it during work times where I can see it having some real challenges. And did we start having 2 committee of the whole meetings a month on some months when things got busy? So I'm just curious, how would that work? Because sometimes we do get a lot of items and requests on our agendas, and we don't want to make decisions by exhaustion. So I'm wondering, how could we have, and where could we put a second committee of the whole meeting or those additional meetings when we do have a lot of items before us? So I actually don't support option 2. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Director Gisborne. Perhaps we can get an answer to your question about what happens if there's an extra meeting called. I don't recall calling an extra meeting of committee of the whole during the last 4 years or even 8 years, but I do recall extra finance committee meetings when we've had one meeting to hear from delegations regarding the grants and the grant applications that people have made, and another finance committee for the decision making. But CAO, do you have a comment regarding the scheduling of an extra meeting should it be necessary?
Through the chair, I'd like to refer this to the author of the report.
Jones.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Additional standing committees can be scheduled at the pleasure of the committee, the chair, or staff can provide advice that we may need to do that as well.
Okay, thank you. Okay, has everyone who wants to speak on this issue spoken a first time?
Sure.
We'll go around now.
Lennox.
Sorry.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm just going to chime. Yes, I'm going to chime in here because obviously I'm the new kid on the block.
Yeah, and keep reminding us that you're there.
Yes, thank you. This is multifaceted. I'm approaching this kind of from I'm a little torn. Director Gisborne brings up some good concerns about fatigue, about people's ability to attend. I was similar to him in my considerations when I had a different kind of lifestyle. But now my travel schedule, this may work. I think I'm with Director Elliott where I'd like to maybe try it and have the option to reassess. That being said, other points have been brought up. They're very valid. There's an extreme amount of information for me to digest. I'm already having trouble because the agenda doesn't come out till very shortly before the meeting. So if we're to try this or move to something more similar, I'm going to need, I need more lead time because I really want to understand this material better. And I'm already an intense amount of material. So my employer is is being cooperative, and I think that having one day where I'm away, it does impact them. But that being said, it allows me to be freed up on the rest of the days. And finally, the meetings are already pretty long, so I have some concerns that even though we've got some good slots there, they can tend, we all like to talk. I'm a talker, and and we want to make our points, and we want to educate our constituents, about what we're talking about. So we have to, time management, it would be a big factor too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Lennox. Director Elliott.
So I'm a working age person, just in case people didn't know that. And at some point, I heard people saying Fridays work well for people. They totally don't work at all for me, because when I do work, it's seasonal. You tend to work on Fridays and Saturdays. I think this decision-making process is a little awkward because I'm not sure what works best for each person. And I wonder if maybe it might be better for each of us to weigh in on our first and second choices and then figure out what's going to work, which option works for the most amount of people. And I think that trying to just discuss it and then vote on one motion may not be the ideal way to decide.
Okay, thank you. Director Dunn.
I wasn't going to speak again. I will. What the heck? I think the less we speak twice, the more we can compact our meetings, and the less they'll run into each other if they're all on the same day. But I'll go back to what I said in the beginning, because there's been a lot of things talked about. Option number 2 is the only one that I went through that didn't have multiple conflicts with other meetings I already have scheduled. That's why I'm in favor of supporting it. I think it's a good option. We already know who the board members are going to be for this year. We all know what our circumstances are. If it works for you, vote yes. If it doesn't work for you, vote no. If you've got a modification, I thought about Fridays, but frankly, Friday is the day when I've been safe to say to all the other people who want to schedule a meeting to me through this year, which most of the people have already done. I've been able to say, let's try a Friday, because I have very few other meetings on the Fridays. Wednesday has been my other backup day, but when I look at what's already scheduled in my calendar, I find no conflicts with option 2, and that's why I'm supporting it. I think people will come to our meetings. It's always going to be problematic for the public to attend. Some will be having supper at the time when the meeting is. Some will be having lunch. But hopefully we can accommodate people the best we can. I think this is worth trying, because I've had way more conflicts in the last year than I would have with option 2 going forward. That's why I'm supporting it.
Okay. Thank you, Director Doubt. I might ask you a question. You see conflicts with option 3?
I've got them on both sides of the piece of paper before I went through for my existing council calendars.
Okay.
There's more conflicts with number 1 than there is with number 3, but there are none with number 2.
Right.
It's a simple choice for me.
Okay, so number 2 is the best. Number 3 is possible. Number 1 is what we have now.
They're all possible. It's just that, what you might see is Director Dowd being somewhere else when there's a city council meeting and a regional district committee, the whole meeting scheduled at the same time. I will be at the city council meeting.
Fair enough. Okay. Further discussion on the motion at hand. Director Gisborne.
Thank you, Chair. I definitely hear the sentiment that, if we put all these meetings in the same day, we're going to have to be very time conscious. And, the more we speak, the more difficult that is to, be time conscious with the decision making. I'm wondering if maybe taking a look at option 2 and the other options, we got Planning Committee, Finance Committee, and Committee of the Whole all on the second Wednesday of the month. What about the idea of having the Planning Committee at 1 o'clock on the first Wednesday, Finance Committee on the second Wednesday, and then Committee of the Whole on the third Wednesday? would there be a scheduling conflict with Director Doubt and other directors to go with that option? And then we wouldn't run into the challenge of, of potentially making decisions by exhaustion. And I'm thinking, one of the first things is just moving that planning committee out of the block, because we want to make it an option for Director Fall to attend, but I don't think the planning committee is something that we've really seen the director of Lesquiti attend frequently. So I'm not sure if planning committee really has any benefit to be in that same block. I'm also curious to hear what the director from Lesquiti thinks about having the finance and committee of the whole either on the same Wednesday or having them 2 Wednesdays apart. And then we can have them all at 1 o'clock at a consistent time, because that's the other thing that the public, it can be challenging to, when people ask, oh, when's the meeting? And I find it's easy when there's a consistent time for members of the public. I know we've done, 4 o'clock for our committees and, 6:30 for our board, and members of the public even I've talked to still kind of get those two mixed up. So that's my thoughts of what if we were to just have it on first Wednesday, second Wednesday, and third Wednesday. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Director Gisborne. We'll get a comment from our corporate officer regarding that possibility.
Okay. Well, the schedule is at the pleasure of the board. That could work. I would have to compare it against other commitments to see if there's any conflicts, but I'm not seeing any right now. What I did not hear though was it planning committee on the first and then finance and committee of the whole on the next, or was it the second and third week?
Director Gisborne?
Oh, sorry, I muted myself. I believe I had kind of two ideas. The first was planning committee on the first Wednesday, and then finance and committee of the whole on the second Wednesday, or potentially planning committee on the first Wednesday, finance committee on the second Wednesday, and then committee of the whole on the third Wednesday. So kind of two options there. And that's where I'm kind of thinking maybe we should go with option 4 on our agenda, which is, based on the input from this discussion, the staff can come back with a little bit more variable options at our board meeting for final adoption. But I'd like to hear the director from Lesquiti, who I see keeps putting his hand up, and I'd like to hear from Director Doubt.
His hand is up, but Director Doubt has a point of order.
My point of order was we have a motion on the floor. I haven't heard an amendment to it. I see people engaging in a discussion about various alternatives. Everybody who speaks comes up with a new alternative. I think we have a lot more chance of getting to the end if we discuss a motion that's on the floor or make amendments to it. We could be here for days talking about what if we moved this and what if we moved that. But the idea of having motions and amendments is to try to focus the debate, try to make a decision.
Thank you, Director Doubt. Good point. Now, Director Fall, your opinion was sought, but Director Brander did have his hand up first, so I will call on him and then we will get to Director Fall.
Thanks, Chair. I was essentially going to mimic what Director Doubt has said. We have a motion in front of us. I think we should deal with the motion. We've gone around this a long time, and I think we've heard from everybody, some of us multiple times.
Director Fall.
Thank you, Chair. I simply wanted to say that there's been a lot of good discussion. The motion is really about 2023 schedule. So inherent in that is that we will be reviewing it. If it really doesn't work, we'll review it before that. But the default is next year we're going to be sitting here talking about it as we've talked about in the past. I do think, the timing of the planning committee, I think is more of an issue of concern for the members of that planning committee. So whether or not an amendment was to move that some other day, that's fine. The one thing I like about having the committee of the whole and the finance committee meetings together, either on the same day or one after the other, 2 days, is that then when I do come up to Powell River, I can attend 2 meetings in one visit, one travel. So that works for me. And, you know, I don't, but I mean, as has been discussed, I think the hard conflicts are really important. So if there's conflicts and members can't be here, that's a problem. Softer conflicts or issues are less of a problem, but I, you know, it's really hard to say which would be working really the best. We have to, you know, the only way we're going to know is to try, and then we'll see, and, you know, we'll get some experience doing this and seeing if we can be more efficient. I think one way to be efficient isn't to make decisions based on less discussion. We do have the option to take items that aren't time sensitive and punting them forward a month. If we run out of time on, say, a finance committee meeting, we can table items or postpone them to the next meeting. So there are other ways to make meetings efficient and not exhaust us, make sure we have a break and can eat and drink between. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Paul. I'm just taking my second opportunity to speak. I have to say that I am not supportive of option 2, because I think by the time we get to committee of the whole, look at the agenda, you know, 300-page agenda. We had a 300 about page agenda for finance yesterday. And I'm afraid that by the time we get to committee of the whole, we're all going to be pretty tired. And I don't think we'll be making the best decisions that we possibly could, nor will we be taking the time to consider the various aspects of those decisions that we can take when we're not totally exhausted from other meetings in the day. So I personally do not support option 2. Of course, I'll go along with whatever is decided, but I prefer option 3 because it does break it up onto the 2 days, and that would be my choice. So I'm not seeing any other hands, so we will have our vote. All those in favor of the recommendation? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, all those opposed? 1, 2, 3. Director Lennox, how are you voting?
I'm going to vote in the affirmative. Thank you.
Okay, so it's carried 4-3. Okay, so now we are on to 8.3, the Canadian Red Cross Emergency Response Agreement Renewal. And you have the recommendation before you. Is there a mover for this recommendation? Director Dowd, seconded by Director Brander. Discussion? Director Brander.
Thanks, Chair. I just had one question. It says in the report, it said 25 evacuees, while the proposed renewal will see the Canadian Red Cross responsible for delivering ESS for larger emergency events impacting up to 500 evacuees. And obviously the number of evacuees has jumped appreciably. I'm just curious if the fee did as well. I'm wondering what we paid in the past.
CAO. Okay, Mr. Toms.
Yes, through the chair, I can give an answer to that. Previous agreements were $10,000. The agreement has gone up for a few reasons, but the scope also is stretching. In the past, we had more of an informal understanding when it came to larger events that the Canadian Red Cross would support, but this agreement and the operations behind it will put a lot more requirements on the Red Cross to make sure they can actually train and support up to that 500. So the agreement has increased in scope and the costs have also gone up, but not entirely because of that. I mean, like a lot of things, costs are also just going up.
Thank you, Mr. Toms.
There's a follow-up then through the chair. I guess what steps has the Red Cross taken to increase their capacity by such a large margin? From 25 to 500, it's pretty substantial.
Mr. Toms?
Yeah, through the chair. And when we think about those types of events that are now impacting 500 residents, you know, it's a sizable portion of a community or a very large neighborhood where even our own volunteers, the onus then is really looking at the Red Cross to leverage its capacity outside our region and not relying on local volunteers, but also being able to bring capacity. We especially look over to Vancouver Island where they have equipment and volunteers and would be required through the agreement to bring that to make sure that we can help set up and support an event here. It would also be looking at the facilities that our community evacuation plans have looked at over the last few years and identified as critical facilities, and we'll look at the Red Cross to make sure that they're looking at those and understanding how they could support that and those facilities if needed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion regarding this item? Seeing no hands, all in favor? Any opposed? Carried unanimous.
Chair, a point of parliamentary privilege.
Okay.
We've been here for about 2 hours. I'd like to call a 5-minute bio break before we move on to all the other items.
Okay, that's fine. We'll take a 5-minute break. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Recording in progress.
All right, we're good to go. All right, well, coming back from our break, we are now on item 8.4, which is the public engagement and survey results for electoral area E regarding emergency dispatch. Quite overwhelming results.
I'll move the recommendation.
The recommendation's been moved, seconded by Director Brander. Thank you. Discussion. Director Paul.
Thank you, Chair. I was pleased to see such a strong number of responses to the survey, with a fair number from part-time and seasonal residents, in addition to many full-time residents. Not bad given the census population of Lesquiti of about 500 people. It was also good to see a clear consensus of the responses. That I think makes moving forward a little bit easier for us. I would like to thank our Manager of Emergency Services for his work on the survey, the public information on the website, and the open house on Lesquiti. The open house was fairly well attended over the day, and the website information was accessed by most respondents, as can be seen in the survey results. I believe that this was a good public consultation process, and I support the next step as recommended. For clarification, I would like to provide a bit of information on how IP addresses work from the Lesquiti Internet Access Society, or LIAS, network. How those IP addresses are seen externally, such as by an online survey tool, based on my understanding after talking with the LIAS network manager. IP addresses on the LIAS network are assigned to the user connection points. This means that all the devices at the same connection point have the same external IP address. That is, all the people who filled in the survey from the same location would be seen by the survey tool as coming from the same IP address, including at the cafe or at the pub or at the Wi-Fi hotspot near the health center. The details of why the LIAS network is set up this way would lead me to dive into details of which I'm certain no one wants to hear right now. But the main point is that the IP addresses seen by the online survey tool are not unusual, given how the LIAS network operates and how it assigns IP addresses to the transceiver points. But with that, I think the staff report is good. The survey results are clear, and I'm happy to support the recommendation from staff. And I'm not sure if Mr. Toms has any comments that he would like to share with us about the process, but it looks pretty clear to me about what the motion is before us. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Toms, did you have a comment?
Chair, thank you for the opportunity, but no, I think it's all there in the report, but happy to answer any questions if the committee should have any.
Okay, thank you. Questions or comments from other directors? I'm seeing no hands up, so we will vote. All in favor of the recommendation? Any opposed? Carried unanimously. 8.5, feedback for Recycle BC draft plan update. And there is a recommendation before us to submit the letter. Is there a mover for this recommendation? Director Brander, Director Paul, second. Thank you. Discussion. Director Paul.
Thank you, Chair. I'm as frustrated by some of these changes as staff report indicates, and I really want to appreciate the effort gone into both the report and the letter. They're strongly worded. Some of these things are, quite frankly, a bit outrageous. It's really kind of backwards. In my view, the remote island population level should be reduced. I mean, not only does this risk some of our existing depots closing, it means the Lesquiti depot would never reach that criteria, and it can never be considered a full depot, which would actually help us financially. I think personally, isolated communities should have more permissive criteria. The Lesquiti depot, in my view, should qualify, as the only other reasonable option is for everyone on the island to bring recycling over to Vancouver Island for the ferry. And that won't entirely happen. What would happen is that some people would put it in the trash. I mean, it's really, maybe we're not talking about closing it down, but it's backwards to be reducing recycling. It's going the wrong way. The other point I want to raise is the grocery store item, which is just silly. Seems to be based, or perhaps is based on the assumption that people receive most of their recycling when they buy groceries, but that is not a correct assumption everywhere. For example, on Lesquiti, many people get their groceries delivered to the ferry, the foot passenger ferry. So they're receiving their groceries at the ferry. They're not going to the grocery store. Therefore, they're not going to any nearby recycling depots in Parksville. One point and a question, I guess, and a suggestion maybe for the letter, and I don't know if it needs a motion, but I think there's another aspect that could be emphasized, and that's the additional driving will cause more greenhouse gas emissions. So it's just a question for Mr. Devereaux, through the chair to Mr. Devereaux or to Ms. McLennan, if whether it be possible to add in the second paragraph, second to last paragraph on the first page, second sentence, there's a list of clauses about, you know, issues, and if it would be possible to add a clause such as increased GHG emissions due to increased driving to reach depots. Because I think that's an element too. It's going backwards to risk closing depots and forcing people to drive further there, that they would trips they would not need to make, longer driving, burning gas. So I really appreciate the effort put into this. I also appreciate the statement at the end of the letter, including costs associated with collections at satellite depots in the cost studies. So maybe if that question through the chair could be addressed, and otherwise I'm happy to support this and move forward.
Okay, thank you, Director Paul. Mr. Devereaux, did you have a comment in response to Director Paul's question?
Yes, if I may, Chair. That could be easily adapted to the letter, a friendly amendment here. One sentence talking about the greenhouse gas effect is pretty easy.
Thank you. Director Brander.
Thanks, Chair. I'm really in support of writing a letter. A lot of the stuff that came out of this report kind of distressed me. The concept of closing the depot down south of town at Black Point store, it just seems ridiculous to me. Denise down there and her predecessors have done a fantastic job keeping things organized and clean. And I mean, I'm no expert. I don't see the actual numbers, but the volume of recycling that goes out of there just seems to be very large. And I think to get rid of that, just be stupid. I agree with Director Fall. I think a lot of the stuff would be thrown in the garbage versus hauling it into town. You got a good program going. Why mess it up?
And it really sends the wrong message that
Totally.
we don't want people to hear, that we don't support recycling. Director Elliott.
Thank you. I think people struggle with recycling as much as possible because of getting the recycling to where it needs to be is problematic for a lot of people. And the harder we make that, the less successful we're going to be. So I'm in favor of feedback that explains that it's better to have everything be easier for people.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Director Lennox.
Yeah, I would like to echo the previous comments and encourage the strongest wording of that letter possible. Obviously, you know, we have our own example of a rural center that is heavily used, and those points that are made are 100%. People are going to drive more, and they're going to throw more in the refuse. So it's crazy and it's discouraging, but I think we need to make our voice heard as best possible, and I like what staff's done there already. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. One of the things that really struck me about this is that a permanent grocery store is a requirement for whether, you know, a community should have a recycling depot. That makes no sense at all. You still have recycling whether you buy it at the corner store or whether you come, you know, to a larger store and buy it. So either way, it still needs to be recycled. So I support the recommendation and the comments that staff are making here. So any other discussion? Seeing none. All in favor of the recommendation? Any opposed?
Aye.
Carried unanimously. So we are now on to 8.6, board appointments. This is where it gets interesting. Okay. So we have a series of recommendations before us. Now we can either have a motion to put forward people's names, or we can deal with these one at a time. What is your pleasure? Directors? Would you prefer to deal with these one at a time? Or would someone like to make a motion?
I prefer them one at a time. And I would also like or suggest that we you know, maybe have a little bit of informal discussion before each one, which is something that Ellie Mina has talked about. So that way we don't end up putting the cart before the horse. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, and if we look at the chart on that is included in our agenda package, the names in green and white are the ones where there is no competition. The ones in red are where we have to make a decision regarding who will be the person that goes. So to the Municipal Insurance Association, we have two names. What is your pleasure, Director Doak?
You can take my name off of that list.
Okay, I have another proposal as well that I could not be the alternate and one of you could be the alternate. I don't mind that at all. So how about a motion that we appoint Director Brander with Director Doubt as the alternate?
I'd second that.
Okay, well, you're okay.
I'm making it. I thought you were making it.
Well, yeah,
make it.
okay, I guess
Okay,
I
I'll
can.
make it.
Okay, and seconded by Director Paul. Was that you seconding it?
Yes.
All right, discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Okay, item number 2, regarding the Powell River Tourism Society. So there are 2 names there. Now, I guess I could say that my name is there because I've served on those boards for the last 2 years, 2 terms, and feel very much part of what they're doing. And, you know, there's quite a flow going. The city, as I understand it, has a representative to Tourism Powell River. I don't know if you've made your appointments yet, but, you know, my interest is certainly there. Director Elliott?
I've filled out things based on wanting to contribute to something, right? So most of the things I put down were things that I had an interest in and we're open to bid on. And so I don't really have a strong desire to be in a particular place, but I'd like to contribute at some point. So if we go down this list and I end up with nothing, I feel like I'm not utilizing my, you know, my desire to help out here.
Okay.
So that's that. So the taking them one at a time makes it so it's difficult for me to figure out how that fits in with the bigger picture. But if you feel strongly about it, absolutely, go ahead.
All right. So, corporate officer?
I just wonder if it would be helpful to fill in the blanks, like discuss it all instead of go one at a time, and then we would know, or.
So that way you wouldn't have to recuse a motion later if we wanted to jig it around. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we've already approved the first one. So that is done. And so is that okay with everyone that we'll discuss them first and then have a motion at the end? Okay. All right. So okay to put my name down there for tourism. And along with that is the North Coast Tourism Advisory Committee. This is a new committee that has been started in the last year. Sunshine Coast Tourism has now 2 advisory committees, one for the North Coast and one for the South Coast. And so they're making quite an effort to give the North Coast more, you know, I guess, more space, more air, more clout on the decision-making process than they have before, which is very welcome. But I do believe that those 2 positions need to go together because they're quite integrated in
what is that area of the North Coast? Does it
Well,
include all
Seashell.
of Prince Rupert or something?
No, we're the North Coast, North Sunshine Coast.
North,
So
okay, gotcha.
the South Coast goes up to Earls Cove, and then from Saltery Bay to Lund is the North Coast.
So I have a huge interest in trying to initiate an economic diversification planning over the next little while. If it is a new committee, it does fit well with economic development as well.
Okay. So we have economic diversification is down under other suggested appointments that we can consider. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, then if it's okay with everyone, I'll put my name McCormick down for 2 and 3. Okay, so,
Chair, for liquid waste management, I'm an option for the alternate. You can take my name out of there.
okay, liquid waste management is,
Put Lennox.
okay, so, all right, Brander is out and Lennox is in. All right,
Ferry.
and then we have Ferry Advisory Committee.
There's also one in the city on the Ferry Advisory Committee, I believe, as well.
All right,
Sorry.
there is a city director that is appointed to the Ferry.
Isn't that-
Advisory Committee.
Isn't it Jim Palm in their case?
I don't know who your representatives are. In any case, we have two names put forward. What is your pleasure for this committee?
Well, I'm a little keen on ferries myself, but I'd also like to hear Director Elliott's thoughts on the Ferry Advisory Committee. I've lived on a number of Gulf Islands and up and down the coast, and running around with farm supplies and pigs and all that kind of stuff. I've got a number of ideas about the ferry service, and I also understand that the Ferry Advisory Committee is very limited. But I'd also like to hear Director Elliott's thoughts on the Ferry Advisory Committee.
Well, I can't think of anything that affects all of us more than the ferries. And so I expect that each and every one of us has a huge interest in how our ferries are operating. So not to take away from anyone else, I would, be willing to take forward the community's interests in that advisory committee. I think we need better from our BC ferries, and I wanted the opportunity to say so. So that was why I had an interest there. But I am aware that the city also has a representative on the BC ferries, which I talk his ear off all the time, telling him what I want him to say. So.
Well, I'm now looking at the list, Chair, and I'm seeing that Director Elliott doesn't have a ton of positions on this list, and I think that she would actually do a wonderful job as the Ferry Advisory Committee rep. So I'm going to pull my name back and hope that Director Elliott accepts the position.
Okay, we're good with that. All right. So now the next one I've got is
Vancouver Island and Coastal Community Climate Leadership Plan Steering Committee.
Right.
And we have two directors who prefer that.
Okay.
So we're listed as both the prefer and the alternates, and it's the same two. So we could just pick which order we put those in. Okay, Director Paul.
I'm happy to continue as alternate, and I looked at these and all of them. I want to make sure we're all balanced, and I think Director Elliott would do an excellent job, and a lot of the former Director Leishman did a great job on that, and a lot of the items they talk about are maybe really more applicable or more relevant or impactful for where there's more people. So much as my interest is in climate change issues, and I'm happy to be an alternate, and sometimes I would attend the meetings and the workshops, I would be very happy if Director Elliott was willing to be the primary representative.
Okay, everybody good with that? Okay, all right. So the next one then is the Pacific Coast Regional District Transit Future Action Plan Working Group. Director Dowd has been in that role, and Director Dowd and Director Gisborne's names are both down. Director Dowd.
I'd be quite happy to defer to Director Gisborne for that.
Okay. Director Gisborne.
Right. Thank you, Director Dowd. I very much enjoy working with the Sunshine Coast Regional District, and the shared transit challenges that we're both facing so that we can get that bus from here to Vancouver is a big job and a big challenge. And if I do get this appointment, I'd also like to ask Director Dowd that I'll be occasionally reaching out to pick his brain on his thoughts. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Director Gisborne. Okay, so that one is done. We're now on to the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure approval process for development services working group. I've been on this, but they've not met during my time on this committee. However, should they meet, I do have some things that I would like to say. Primarily that local governments are entrusted to develop policy regarding land use, yet we don't have the approving authority over decisions based on those policies. So to me, that does not make sense. And that would be why I would want to sit on that committee, should it ever meet, which remains in doubt. Director Gisborne, your name is also there.
Yeah, and I echo those comments from Director McCormick. Additionally, one of the challenges I've seen in Area B is that we're having developments approved and subdivisions approved, and I believe it was at a UBCM or AVICC where I asked it was the provincial ministry about subdivision approval that they keep talking about active transportation. And I said, well, you're wanting to do all this active transportation, but when it comes to a subdivision, what policies do you have to get the land to have like an active transportation corridor? Because right now, the only thing that they take is land for cars. And the response I got from Ministry of Transportation was, well, we don't have any policies to take land for active transportation. And I think if we're going to move forward, with development, and which is happening anyways, the provincial government, Ministry of Transportation, really needs to look at the long-term plan for active transportation corridors, because like right now, they're completely autocentric, and they don't really take into account local government policies. They take it into consideration, but as I understand it, there isn't even a requirement that they have to, follow the OCPs. And I've heard of some other regional districts where a regional district was opposing a subdivision, and the Ministry of Transportation approved it anyways. So this is something I am quite keen on, but I'm so maybe a rock paper scissors with Director McCormick over this one.
Well, no, I mean, I will, I've got lots to do. So, I don't mind, giving that up. But I would remind Director Gisborne that it is not, the whole point of that working group is not active transportation, but rather the approval process for development services. And that is what that working group is going to be looking at, should it ever come together. So remember, that's your focus, not active transportation.
No, it's a whole thing.
Okay, so I will withdraw my name from that. So the next one going down the list is the Social Action Planning Advisory Committee. There's only one name there, and we are invited to send 2 representatives. So is there anyone else that would like to sit with me on that committee? Director Brandon.
Well, I believe Director Lennox expressed some interest in it, or if he's still on the line. Or
Director Lennox, are you there?
You beat me to it, Director Brander. I appreciate that, and I appreciate you flagging that for me. It's been a busy day, and I haven't had a chance to look at that list for a little bit. So, and I can't see it now. So I appreciate you guys going through it for me. It's helpful, and I'm willing to help out in any way, and I would gladly accept this committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Corporate Officer?
Thank you, Chair. I think we're in a position to vote on 2 through 11 all at once, if you guys would like.
Certainly. Director Doe.
Is that what you're suggesting, Chair?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then I have a question.
Yes.
So number 10 is that the committee recommends to the board that the Quebec Regional District endorses all other proposed 2023 board appointments as Appendix A. And when I look at it, I think the only one that I think is an other is where we have in yellow the new community to community improvement affairs sessions with 3 names. And I think, but it doesn't say that anywhere that I've seen, that means that there would be 3 people from the regional district authorized to attend C3 meetings, and only 3.
That is my understanding.
Yeah. I'm not sure that I agree with that. I don't know if that meets with the protocol or it's part of the agreement with between the 3 parties that are part of the protocol. Because I think up until now, all the members of the regional district board, all the councilors on city council, and I think all the legislatures members for the Tla'amin organization have been invited to that. So I think that's what number 10 means, but I don't know. And I'm asking to have that verified. And if it is, well, I'd like to know the strength of what documentation is there to back it up that we have only 3 positions on that.
Okay, so that's part 1 of the question, but also CAO, you're going to comment on that? No, corporate officer. So that's one part, but also why the change from all of us down to 3?
Oh, I think that we might want to we could strike that out now and then have more information come from staff at a later date.
Yeah. My suggestion simply, I think that's the only thing that number 10 does. We could simply eliminate number 10.
Okay, there are other appointments though. All the ones that were not congested, all the ones that have single names attached to them.
I'm just trying to find a way to go ahead without answering the question that I had.
Theo?
Through the chair, if I'm not mistaken, there was some discussion at a previous meeting that somebody was going to make a notice of motion for further investigation into C3 meetings and attendance. So I would suggest that we strike the yellow out of this list, and then 10 can stand, and then everybody that was in white gets appointed as needed, and all the others 8 through 1 take care of the conflicting ones where there was more than one name put forth, and yeah, then I think we've got everything in order.
Makes excellent sense to me.
Okay, Director Elliott is next, and Director Brander.
Thank you, Chair. I think that what is the attempt is to implement things that were just at a discussion phase and hadn't been decided yet. And the one of the concerns as part of that discussion was a way to have a meeting that didn't have a quorum for each of the governments so that they could be handled in a little bit different way. And that was the concern. And the suggested solution would be to have only 3 representatives from both the QRD and only the executive from the Tla'amin and 3 from the city. This decision would be in anticipation of a decision that had not been made yet.
Okay, so Director Brander is next, then Director Doe.
Okay, thanks, Chair. We have the 2 other suggested appointments as well, and I guess I would like a little bit more information before we go ahead with those: the Economic Diversification / Development, and also the Paradise Valley Exhibition Park Society. Because from what I recall, we used to be in Paradise Valley Exhibition Park Society, but we struck that off of the list. And I'm wondering why we did that, and if those reasons still are, reasonable for us not to be a part of that one.
Chair, that is addressed in the report. It was struck off in 2018 for potential conflict of interest. And there is a suggested motion in there just to have staff investigate to see if an appointment is possible, and also if the society desires us to have representation. We just didn't have enough time to do investigation of that once we received the suggestion. So we would just need more and potentially a legal opinion. I think that's what the recommendation in the report suggests.
Right. Well, for that one, I wouldn't mind making that motion to just get some more information from staff.
All right, thank you. A motion.
I'll second that.
Director Gisborne, second. Any discussion on the motion on the floor?
Point of clarification, Chair, we don't have a motion on the table right now for the, that's in the agenda, or where are we at with motions? Because we were talking about community. I mean, I would prefer that we do the recommendations first before we, and then handle these other items as a subsequent.
Okay, but we don't actually have a motion regarding those recommendations. CAO?
Point of order. I asked before, and what we had was a motion on the floor to go through all of these, up to number 11, I think it is, all in one go. And I thought that was a motion.
We haven't got a mover and a seconder for that.
CAO?
Through the chair, just for clarification from the corporate officer, this list, does it strike off and end at suggested appointments because they're not truly appointments at this time?
Yeah, thank you through the chair. Those are just other suggested appointments and nobody has been appointed to those yet. If after this discussion that occurs, then
that's fine. Yeah. You clarified that. So if I've got it correct, then my previous suggestion is, or was, if you strike out the yellow new community to community, then everything on this list up to the pink where it says other suggested appointments would get covered with one full motion of adopting 2 through 9, then a subsequent motion to do 10, then a subsequent motion to entertain the research by the staff, and then you could do number 11.
Okay, well, we do have a motion on the floor. And that was Director Brander, if I have this correct, that you would like staff to bring back a report regarding sending a representative to Paradise Exhibition Society. Have I got that right? That has been moved and seconded. So that motion is the one on the table right now. Is there any further discussion on that motion? Director Gisborne.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Yeah, my understanding was we were having an informal discussion about appointments and making the list. And now we have a motion on the floor for the Paradise Valley Exhibition Park Society. And I'm happy to support the motion. And one of the reasons why I think it's of interest is the Paradise Exhibition Park is a unique situation in our region. As I understand it, it's a provincial park leased to the regional district, which is then leased to PEPS, which then is subleased to a bunch of other organizations. And on our agenda, we have an excerpt from the Conflict of Interest Exceptions Regulation. And I think that that should cover us, but then again, I'm not a lawyer and therefore I'd like to hear from our staff. And I'm not even sure if I would necessarily want to be the one appointed. I think Cindy Elliott, I would see if she would want to, but I think it would have some value for the organization to have a member on the PEPS board. And I believe in the past, the PEPS board representative from the regional district was a non-voting member. They were more of there for, to be there for part of the discussion and to then kind of report back to the regional district if there was any kind of challenges going on. And then it was more of so that that organization and the regional district could kind of be aware of each other a little bit more and try and help each other out. So I'm very happy to support this motion. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, any further discussion? Director Elliott. This is on the motion for the staff report regarding sending a rep to Paradise Valley Exhibition Society. That is the motion on the floor.
So I'm a little bit worried that I shouldn't be participating and should maybe leave because I am a board of directors for the Powell River Therapeutic Riding, and the board of directors for Powell River Therapeutic Riding appoints a member to the PEPS board that votes.
We're only asking.
But I'm not on the PEPS report, so I don't know if whether that's a problem.
I don't believe it's a problem when we're asking for a staff report. Okay, that is the motion before us.
That was my concern. Thanks.
All right. Anything else on asking for a staff report? Seeing no hands, all in favor? Any opposed? Carried. All right. So now we are back to the list with the deletion of the yellow section. And So what is your pleasure? We have the list of recommendations before us. Director Gisborne?
Oh, thank you. I really like the list that we've come up with. There was just one thing, and it's completely my apologies. There was one thing I preferred that I didn't include on my list, and it was the Coastal Invasive Species Committee, which Director Fall has also listed that he prefers. So I was just wondering how keen he is to continue that role, just because as the Agricultural Advisory Committee rep, invasive species is a big challenge for agriculture as well. And I just want to hear from Director Fall on how keen and passionate and also how busy he is. So I'd like to hear from Director Fall. Thank you, Chair.
Director Fall.
Well, first of all, I quite like that committee, but I think in relation to my previous comments, if I think of the balance, by my rough tally, I'm represented on two of these committees or organizations, and Director Gisborne is on the list for 6. So I would actually think from a balance point of view, I would prefer to keep it. I know Director Gisborne has in the past expressed interest in it, and I know he's keen on it, but he's got a lot of other things on the portfolio, and there are limited numbers of things that I am really able to be. This is actually only one of the only discretionary ones, because I'm on the library by requirement. I'm on the Skeety Waste Management by requirement. So I actually would like to keep it, and I work well with those people.
Okay. In that case, I won't put my name forward for it, and keep up the good work, Director Fall. Right. And with that, I'm very happy with the list, and I'm just waiting for a motion to move forward with acceptance of this list and to send it to the board. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so we have 11 items on the list. Is there a mover for these recommendations?
I'll move items 1 to 9. I believe that's what the CAO suggested. Items 1 to 9 with the names filled in as listed.
2 to 9. 2 to 9, yes.
Oh, 2 to 9. Okay, yes. Yes, that's.
I'll second.
Okay, discussion. Director Fall.
I just have one brief comment. I think one of the issues when I was looking through this is how do we balance workload, and representation on one of these organizations isn't really that directly relevant. What's more relevant is the numbers of meetings, and maybe something, and I want to put a task on all the members of this committee's list for next year, maybe not this year, but it would be quite useful for me to know how many times these other organizations meet, because some of them are quite heavy, some of them are very light. We heard one that hasn't even met, so being on a committee that doesn't meet isn't very onerous. Being on a committee that meets every 2 months, that's more onerous, every 2 weeks. So I think that would be really useful for next time, and I think it would be good to move forward with this now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Director Doak.
I'm going to move an amendment to that motion.
Okay.
And the amendment is to include number 10 and number 11.
All right.
And if there's a seconder, I'll explain why that is.
Okay, Director Elliott has seconded that. Okay, go ahead, Director Doak.
First off, they seem reasonable things to do. Number 10 needs to be there because there are specific ones that are missed in number 2 to 9, even if we include number 1. And this covers the ones that are in white, I think is the easiest way to describe that. And number 11 simply forwards everything to the board in December to get finalized. So I think we should include 10 and 11. Okay. And it'll save us some time.
All right. So speaking to the amendment, is there any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing no hands, all in favor of the amendment? Okay, any opposed? Carried unanimously. So the main motion as amended is items 2 to 11 on this list. Is there any further discussion on that motion? Seeing no hands, all in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Woohoo, we're there. Okay, under new business, terms of reference for standing committees, Director Brander.
Thanks, Chair. Like I explained I made my notice of motion. We have these standing committees of Planning Committee, Committee of the Whole, and Finance, and it was brought to my attention that we don't have terms of reference for them. I think they'd be valuable documents to have. I don't believe they'd be very onerous for staff to throw them together, and there's no real strong time consideration on them. So I think it seems like a pretty Easy one.
Okay, so you're moving this recommendation?
Yes, I am.
Is there a seconder for this recommendation? Director Paul, thank you. I have a question actually. What would be the point of doing this? What?
Just for clarification, so we, everybody can understand what, where the boundaries are, I guess, where a certain committee starts and finishes. And, usually when we set up committees, we start off with the terms of reference, and here we have these standing committees that we have no terms of reference for. So.
Okay, Director Elliott?
As a new person coming in, it would be really helpful to understand what it is that the committee's scope, purpose, what their goals, at the terms of reference would be helpful. I mean, if someone's been sitting on the committee for a really long time, they maybe don't feel it's useful, but for someone new coming in, it would be super helpful.
Okay. Further discussion? Director Paul and Director Gisborne?
Just briefly, and I think I heard Director Lennox voicing.
Lennox, yep.
I, as my understanding is, and I'll be corrected if I'm wrong. The chair of the regional districts, one of the few authorities, really, is to set and create these standing committees. And so when that is done, when we've seen it done last term, we had the finance committee created by former Chair Brabazon. The chair gives a reason for that and a rationale. And this is I see this as kind of formalizing it. I see it as actually a really useful idea because then the chair of the regional district, when changing it or when articulating what the chair wants as standing committees, will it go through the process of defining terms of reference that clarify what exactly that committee's for. So I see this as a formalization of the authority of what the chair already has, and I think it's a good thing.
Okay, thank you. Director Gisborne, I think you were next. No.
Director Lennox.
Lennox, sorry. Director Lennox.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I just want to, as that new person that Director Elliott referenced, I fully agree that these are helpful documents in my professional life. Establishing committees, it's our best practice, and it helps people, especially the new people, to understand again those parameters of those committees and the expectations and limitations. So I fully support that. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion, Director Gisborne.
Thank you, Chair. My understanding is that these are standing committees. And my understanding, the planning committee, committee of the whole, finance, standing committees. My understanding is that they meet regularly and typically has a broader mandate than a select committee, which is appointed for a special purpose. And a select committee having appointed for a special purpose has those defined terms of reference. As I understand it, the regional district board chair is the one that may establish a standing committee for matters the chair considers would be better dealt with by the committee. The board chair may appoint persons to those committees. Only the board as a whole has the power to appoint select committees and also appoint persons to those committees. So that's where I'm kind of I get the intention of this motion, but a standing committee is created by the chair. So I really think that the terms of reference and the expectation of those committees, any standing committee, should be drafted by the chair, because it's the chair that has created those standing committees, and it's the chair that can get rid of them like that. We used to have a rural services standing committee, and the chair did just that, just got rid of it. And therefore, I don't think it's really wise to task staff with writing a terms of reference for standing committees. I think that it should be up to the chair to write what their expectations are of the standing committees that the chair has created. So I will actually vote against this motion, and if the chair wants terms of reference for the standing committees that the chair has created, then I would suggest that the chair write their expectations for the standing committees that the chair has created. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Gisborne. Is there further discussion on this motion? I'm seeing no hands, so we will vote. All in favor? Any opposed? One opposed. All right. Now, 9.2, job descriptions for electoral area directors, the chair, and municipal directors. Director Brandon.
I move the recommendation.
Okay, the recommendation has been moved. Is there a seconder for this recommendation? Is there a seconder? Director Fall. Okay, thank you. Discussion. Director Brandon.
Thanks, Chair. And again, I see this as just a very valuable, or these can be very valuable documents. I've seen other regional districts do these job descriptions. I think it's great when I'm going through, I'm reading George Cuffer, I'm reading Ellie Mina. They define what the different positions are responsible for. And I think if we have job descriptions, not only is it good for those that are sitting on the board to just look over it once in a while and remind themselves what they're responsible for, but it's also a great tool for those who are contemplating running for office.
Thank you. Director, who was, I don't know who was first. So Fall and then Elliott.
Okay, I just have a question.
Lennox.
I think from what Director Brander just said, I think I understand better. I just want to be clear the intent here. I wasn't sure if it was the role of the directors or the chair in general, our role on the board, what we're able to do, which is what I understand from the comments just made, versus something more along the line of portfolios or tasks. So if I understand, it's just a question. Is it more the former? The intent here is to have descriptions of what it is to be an EA director in general, rather than a specific task on this board and a chair in general. Is that the goal here?
Yeah, through the chair, that would be the goal. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Elliott, then Director Lennox.
Thank you. I think educational tools are awesome to help people understand what it is they're biting off and so forth. I hesitate to use the word job description in a formal sense because the charter sets out, what your job is, and anything that might be perceived to be, stomping on it, changing it, restricting it, or what have you would be a bad thing. But if it had some sort of disclaimer that it's not meant to change anything that's already written in the community charter or reduce the scope of anything through I think it would be okay because it's an educational tool, as long as it's not meant to change what we already have been given through the community charter.
Okay. Thank you, Director Elliott. Director Lennox.
Chair, I hadn't actually raised my voice, but since you've given me the opportunity, I do again think back to the previous point that is helpful for people who are prospective directors, and I think that the charter and other acts supersede us, if I'm correct. And I think that the intent is well placed. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Lennox. Director Doubt, then Director Gisborne.
I think, I'm looking at this generally, and I think, a more appropriate description would be a written set of written description of the role of directors as opposed to a job description, because I don't think I have a job for the regional district. I'm an elected representative. I don't have a boss. And there are a number of things that about a job description that generally start out with who your boss is, how you report to your boss, what you do, and how you get ordered to do things, and how you're accountable for what you do. I think a lot of those don't apply at all to an elected representative. So a description of the role of a director, I think, is a valuable thing. I'm not sure there has to be a distinction between a municipal director and an electoral area director as far as what their role is on the board. As long as the regional district stays in their role descriptions with what's in the purview of the board, that's fine. When they try to go out there beyond there to the municipality, that's, I think, exceeding the authority of the board. So I don't have a problem with this. It'd be good to be able to get a one-page description of what the role is for a director of the regional district that they could read, maybe even before they run for office, so they know what they're getting into. Wouldn't be a bad thing. I'm generally in favor of it, and this is just basically asking for some drafts.
So are you proposing an amendment then to change the word job in the recommendation to the word role?
No, I'm just trying to suggest that maybe the language should be changed when we get to having a draft.
Okay, all right. You heard. Okay, Director Gisborne, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Just thinking back to my campaign statements that I made in the Power Over Peak on September 30th, where I said that the public writes my job description with their expectations. That's only partially true. The provincial government is our boss. The provincial government sets our job description, and the public, through the democratic process, also writes our job description. So I see our job description is written by the provincial government and by the public. I looked around at other regional districts and I couldn't find any document that talked about a regional director's job description. I have found documents of roles and responsibilities, but not job descriptions. Maybe I just didn't look hard enough. If a member of the public is looking to run for office, there is a plethora of good information on the internet under the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and under the UBCM. I don't think we need to write a whole document about our job description that is then written by staff and adopted by the board. Members of the public that want to know what our roles and our responsibilities are and what our job description is, they can look at the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, the one that is the provincial ministry responsible for creating the role that we fill. And when an elected official takes the seat, there is a whole training process to find out our job description and our role and our responsibility. And when I hopefully see all of you at the Local Government Leadership Academy, they have a ton of information and training that help elected officials getting the training that they need so they better understand their roles and responsibilities. The electoral area director also has a unique role, which is that they are elected by the public to be responsible for matters concerning their unincorporated electoral area, which he or she represents. And the electoral area director has the dual role, which is to represent the interests of their area and to balance that with the obligation to make decisions in the best interests of the region as a whole. So the motion before us is that the committee recommend the board direct staff to draft job descriptions for electoral area directors, the QRD board chair, and municipal directors and bring them back to a future committee of the whole meeting. I find that to be an inappropriate motion to direct our staff to write our job descriptions. Those are written by the province and the public. I also think it's a misuse of our staff's time when our community is facing so many challenges and we have so much work to do and so much already to task our staff with. So I don't see the need to pass this motion. Maybe later, further on in the term, we can revisit it, maybe look at something a little different, like roles and responsibilities, but job description, sorry, that's a bridge too far for me. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Director Gisborne. And, you know, I'd like to weigh in that for electoral areas, not all of us conduct the role or carry out the role the same as the next person, because in some areas there's a need for public meetings and talking about things. In other areas, not so much. Each area brings with it its own set of conditions that lead to the director's role or affect the director's role. So I find that for electoral area directors, it would be very difficult to have unless it was so general, so vague that it didn't really say anything, because each one of us will do the role the way we see fit to serve our specific electoral area. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Is there any further discussion on this item? Seeing no hands. All in favor? 1, 2, 3. Any opposed? 1, 2, 3. Director Lennox?
Nay.
Nay?
Nay? Okay.
Nay.
Nay. Thank you very much. Okay, so that is not carried. 9.2. All right, so 9.3 is a notice of motion that I'm putting forward because of the housing crunch. And I would like to know what other regional districts are doing. What can be done? What can a local government do regarding, you know, the housing shortage? What solutions are working in other areas? And, you know, what has been successful? How big an impact does Vancouver Coastal Health have regarding setback rules for septic fields? In other words, it has to be set back so far for your septic field that you don't have room to put in more than one on your property. So things like that. We're under huge pressure. I know in Area D, the biggest thing holding us back is the lack of housing. We've had great people come and go because they can't find a place to live. And it is a continual frustration. So I'm introducing this today as a notice of motion that will be for discussion at our meeting in January. And that's what that is all about.
Question, Chair.
Yes.
Point of order. I think you've made a notice of motion. I don't think a notice of motion is up for debate. I think it's a notice that that's going to happen and then we move on.
Thank you.
I think debate happens when it comes
when
to
the motion is on the table. That's what I anticipate. So I have
it's a question of procedure, Chair.
Okay, go ahead.
Is this not an item more suited for our planning committee?
No, I think it involves committee of the whole because I think the solutions that are out there may well impact the city or affect the city or may be useful to the city. So I think it's bigger than planning. I think it should include Area E as well, which Area E is not in the planning service. So that's why it's here at committee of the whole.
Okay, my understanding was that it's a land use planning that restricts access to housing. Thank you for the clarification.
Okay, we have a 9.4, which is a notice of motion that Director Paul is putting forward. Director Paul.
Thank you. So I don't have specific words for the motion right now, but what the notice of motion is regarding volunteer fire department honorariums to bring forward a motion regarding an expanded volunteer fire department honorarium policy at the January 2023 committee of the whole meeting. So the expectation will be that there will be a specific wording of a motion that I will send to staff prior to that meeting. It'll be on the agenda and then we can debate it and decide whether to support it or not at that time.
Okay, thank you very much, Director Paul. And that brings us to question period. Are there questions out there? Mr. Galinsky, have you given up on us? Okay, Councillor Baum.
Just one point of clarification on the Ferry Advisory, Local Advisory Committee. Does the RD still have a representative on the BC Ferry Advisory Board? That when I was on this body, Director or Chair Palmer used to attend on a regular basis.
Comment on that.
No, nice.
Okay, we're tossing a ball back and forth here, and I'm in the middle.
Trying to get recognized, Chair.
Okay, CAO.
Through the chair. I think you're referring to the BC Ferry Advisory Committee, and that disbanded a number of years ago.
Thanks for that clarification.
Thank you. Anyone else have a question for us? Seeing none, then we have a motion to go in camera. Would someone like to read this motion, please?
You want me to read it?
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I move that the committee move in camera and that the meeting be closed to the public on the grounds that the subject matter to be considered relates to matters covered by the community charter under section 91. A, personal information about identifiable individuals who holds or is being considered for a position as an officer, employee, or agent of the regional district or another position appointed by the regional district. C, labor relations or other employee relations. G, litigation or potential litigation affecting the regional district. And N, the consideration of whether a committee meeting should be closed under a provision of this subsection or subsection 2.
Thank you. Seconded by Director Brander. Discussion, seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? We're going in camera. o'clock.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Okay, you're not done yet, Jason.
I know we're not done.
Thank you. Bye.
We're back in session, Chair.
All right, well, there is no rise in report, so our committee of the whole meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good night, everyone.
Everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.